My twin sister spent our whole lives trying to one-up everything I did, so I told her I was applying to Harvard knowing she'd copy me and get rejected. Raven had been shadowing my every move since we could walk. When I took piano lessons, she demanded the same teacher, then practiced twice as long to outshine me at recitals. When I joined debate team, she not only joined but became captain. When I dated Kieran from my chemistry class, she somehow convinced him I was boring and stole him away. The breaking point came senior year when I mentioned wanting to study journalism at Northwestern. 2 days later, she announced she'd always dreamed of Northwestern's journalism program. She even rewrote her college essay to mirror mine, claiming we'd shared the same inspirational moment watching the news together. That's when I hatched the plan. At dinner, I casually mentioned my Harvard application. I'm applying for their pre-med program. I lied smoothly. The acceptance rate is brutal, but I think my volunteering at the hospital gives me an edge. Raven's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. Harvard? That's interesting. I've actually been considering their pre-med track too. Really? Mom looked surprised. Since when are you interested in medicine? I've been exploring it quietly, Raven said, shooting me a competitive glance. I was planning to surprise everyone. Within a week, she'd signed up for MCAT prep courses and started volunteering at the same hospital. She even convinced our parents to pay for an expensive admissions consultant. Meanwhile, I was secretly applying to journalism programs across the country. The Harvard rejections came in March. Mine was expected. I'd intentionally bombed the application, but watching Raven's face crumble as she read her rejection letter almost made me feel guilty. Almost. I don't understand, she whispered, tears streaming. My grades are perfect. My test scores, sometimes it's just not meant to be, I said, trying to hide my satisfaction. April brought my acceptances to Columbia, NYU, and 3 other journalism programs. When I announced my decision to attend Columbia for journalism, the silence at dinner was deafening. Journalism? Dad asked. But you said you wanted to be a doctor. I never said that. I said I was applying to Harvard's pre-med program. I never said I actually wanted to go. Raven's face turned white, then red. You lied. I strategized. That night, she confronted me in my room, angrier than I'd ever seen her. Do you know what you've done? She hissed. I turned down early admission to 3 schools because of your stupid Harvard lie. Now I have nothing. You have the same backup schools I do, I pointed out. No, I don't. I was so focused on copying your medical path that I never applied to anything else. The realization hit me like a freight train. In my quest for revenge, I'd accidentally sabotaged her entire future. But then her expression changed. The anger melted into something calculating, almost sinister. You know what? She said quietly. Thank you. What? She smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile she wore when she was planning something destructive. I just realized something important. All these years, I've been following you. But you know what? You've actually been following a path I set for you. I stared at her, confused. Think about it, she continued. Every time I copied you, I did it better, which meant you had to work harder to stay ahead. I've been pushing you your entire life without you realizing it. My stomach dropped. And now, she whispered, I know exactly how to get what I really want. She turned to leave, then paused at my doorway. By the way, I lied too. I never actually applied to Harvard. I knew you were lying from the start. I couldn't fit what happens next in this short video. Watch the rest down below. The words hung in the air like smoke after a fire. I sat frozen on my bed, processing what she just said. If she never applied to Harvard, then what was that rejection letter? What were all those tears? What are you talking about? I managed to whisper. Raven leaned against my doorframe, arms crossed, looking more relaxed than I'd seen her in months. I've known you were planning something since December. You think I'm stupid? You started acting differently the moment you got that Northwestern acceptance letter. My blood went cold. How do you know about Northwestern? I steam opened your mail 3 days before you saw it. Her voice was matter-of-fact, like she was discussing the weather. Beautiful acceptance letter, by the way. Full scholarship, too. Must have felt incredible to read. The room started spinning. Northwestern had been my dream school. I'd worked for years to craft the perfect application. Spent months on my essay about wanting to expose corporate corruption through investigative journalism. That moment of pure joy when I'd opened the letter, thinking I was the first to know. You opened my mail, I said slowly. I've been opening your mail since sophomore year. College brochures, scholarship notifications, that summer journalism program you did. I knew about all of it before you did. She laughed, but it wasn't the laugh I remembered from childhood. This was different, hollow. Do you have any idea how exhausting it's been? Pretending to be surprised every time you shared your news? I couldn't speak. 18 years of memories were reshuffling themselves in my mind like a deck of cards being cut and redealt. The Harvard thing was obvious, she continued. You hate blood. You've never shown the slightest interest in science, and you literally passed out during our biology dissection unit. Pre-med? Please. She pushed off the doorframe and walked to my desk, running her finger along the edge like she owned the place. But I'll give you credit. It was a decent attempt at manipulation. So the rejection letter, oh, that was real. I applied to Harvard under your plan just to see how far you'd take the lie. But I applied for their psychology program, not pre-med. Got rejected because my essay was intentionally terrible. She picked up my Northwestern acceptance letter from my desk. When had she taken it? And held it up to the light. Want to know what's funny? I got into their psychology program. Full ride, just like you got for journalism. The floor seemed to tilt under me. You applied to Northwestern? Applied and got accepted. Yes. But here's the thing. She set my letter back down, aligning it perfectly with the desk edge. I'm not going. What? I'm taking a gap year instead. Maybe I'll travel. Maybe I'll start that photography business I've been planning. Or maybe, she paused, that calculating smile returning. Maybe I'll do something else entirely. I found my voice. What do you want, Raven? She perched on my desk chair and spun it once, slowly, before stopping to face me directly. I want you to understand something that's apparently taken me 18 years to figure out myself, which is, I don't want to be you. The words came out soft, almost gentle. I never did. I stared at her. But you copied everything, because that's what everyone expected. Her voice hardened. From the moment we were born, every single person in our lives compared us. Same face, same birthday, same DNA. So obviously we must want the same things, right? When you started piano, Mom signed me up too. When you joined soccer, Dad bought me cleats. When you got interested in journalism, our guidance counselor suggested I explore media too. She stood up and walked to my window, looking out at our backyard where we played as kids. Do you remember when we were 7 and Mrs. Patterson asked what we wanted to be when we grew up? I did remember. It was career day at school. You said journalist. So I said journalist too, because that's what twins do. But you know what I actually wanted to say? I shook my head. Archaeologist. I wanted to dig up dinosaur bones and solve ancient mysteries. But I couldn't say that, because then everyone would spend the rest of the day talking about how different we were, how strange it was that identical twins could want different things. The memory hit me like a slap. I remembered that day. I remembered feeling proud that we'd said the same thing. I'd never once wondered what she actually wanted. So I started copying you, she continued, still facing the window. At first, it was survival. Easier to be your mirror than to deal with everyone's confusion when we were different. But then I realized something incredible. She turned back to me, and her expression was almost pitying. I was better at being you than you were. The words stung, but I couldn't deny them. She'd outperformed me in piano, debate, even with Kieran. Every time I started something, she finished it stronger. And the more I succeeded at being your shadow, the harder you worked to stay ahead. You became this driven, ambitious person who never settled for second place. She sat back down in my chair. I created you, don't you see? The person you are today, the overachiever, the strategist, the girl who got into Columbia and Northwestern, that's not who you were born to be. That's who you became. Because I pushed you. I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but the pieces were clicking together too neatly. Every major decision in my life had been motivated by staying ahead of her. Even my college applications. I'd pushed harder because I knew she was watching, waiting to copy. So what now? I asked. You've made your point. You win. I don't want to win. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. I want to stop playing this game entirely. What does that mean? It means I'm telling Mom and Dad the truth about everything. The mail opening, the copying, the way we've both been living lies for years. She stood up and walked toward the door. And then I'm going to do what I should have done a long time ago. Which is? She paused at the threshold, not looking back. I'm going to become who I actually am, instead of your shadow or your puppet master. Wait, the word escaped before I could stop it. Who are you then? If you're not my twin who copies everything, if you're not the mastermind who's been pulling my strings, who is Raven? She was quiet for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. I don't know yet, but I'm looking forward to finding out. She left, closing the door softly behind her. I sat in the silence, staring at my Northwestern acceptance letter, and trying to figure out if anything about my life was actually mine. The next morning at breakfast, Raven dropped her bombshell. I have something to tell you all, she announced, setting her orange juice down with the same precision she'd aligned my letter the night before. Dad looked up from his newspaper. Mom paused mid-bite of her toast. I gripped my coffee mug so hard my knuckles went white. I've been lying to this family for years. The silence was immediate and complete. Even the kitchen clock seemed to stop ticking. What kind of lying? Mom asked carefully. The kind where I pretended to want the same things as my sister when really I've been manipulating her entire life. Raven's voice was calm, conversational. She could have been discussing the weather. Dad folded his newspaper down. What are you talking about? I've been opening her mail since we were 15. I've been copying her interests not because I shared them, but because I knew I could do them better and force her to work harder. I've been pulling her strings like she was my personal marionette. I watched our parents' faces change as the words sank in. Dad's eyebrows drew together. Mom's mouth fell open slightly. That's quite an accusation, Dad said slowly. Do you have any proof of these claims? Raven pulled out her phone and set it on the table. Would you like to hear the recording of her conversation with her journalism teacher about internship applications? I made it from outside his classroom door. Or maybe you'd prefer to see photos of all the mail I've opened over the years. I kept everything, just in case. She swiped through her phone, showing glimpses of images I couldn't see clearly from across the table. This is insane, I said, finding my voice. Why would you do this? Because I could. Because it was the only way to feel like I had control over something in my life. She looked at me directly. And because part of me hated you for being first. First out of the womb, first to talk, first to walk, first to have an identity that wasn't the other twin. Do you know what it's like to spend your entire life being introduced as, and this is Raven, her sister? Mom reached across the table toward Raven. Honey, we never meant, I'm not finished. Raven's voice cut like ice. I also lied about Northwestern. I got in too, full scholarship, but I'm not going. You got in? Dad's voice cracked slightly. To Northwestern, but you never mentioned applying. I applied to a lot of places you don't know about. Berkeley, Stanford, NYU, Columbia. Columbia, I interrupted. My Columbia? Your Columbia accepted me too. Journalism program, just like you. Turns out when you've been studying someone's interests for years, it's pretty easy to write a compelling application essay. The coffee mug slipped from my hands and shattered against the floor. Brown liquid spread across the white tiles like spilled blood. How many schools? Mom whispered. 14. I got into 11. Raven's phone buzzed and she glanced at it. Make that 12. UC Davis just sent an acceptance email. I stared at the broken mug at my feet, unable to process what I was hearing. She'd gotten into Columbia, my school, my program, my future that I'd worked so hard for, and she'd done it as an afterthought. Why? The word came out as barely a whisper. Because I wanted to prove I could. Because I wanted to see what it felt like to beat you at your own game one final time. She stood up from the table. But mostly because I wanted to burn it all down. Burn what down? Dad asked. This. She gestured around the table, at our family, at the life we'd built. This lie we've all been living where we pretend we're one big happy family with twin daughters who happen to be different people. We're not different people. We're two halves of one person who got split in the womb and have been trying to fuse back together ever since. Mom was crying now, tears streaming down her face. Raven, please. I'm leaving, she announced. Today. I've already packed. Leaving for where? Dad's voice was sharp now, parental authority kicking in. Does it matter? Somewhere I can figure out who I am without her shadow hanging over me. She looked at me. Or, without casting my shadow over her. She turned to walk away, but I found my voice. Wait, everyone looked at me. I slowly stood up, my legs unsteady, glass crunching under my shoes. You're right. What? Mom looked between us, confusion written across her face. You're right, I repeated, louder this time. About everything. I've been living my life in reaction to you. Every choice I made was about staying ahead, about being different, about proving I was my own person. But I wasn't my own person. I was your competitor. Raven's expression softened slightly. Yeah, so where does that leave us? She was quiet for a long moment, considering. I don't know. I have an idea. The words surprised me as they came out. I hadn't planned to speak, but suddenly I knew exactly what needed to happen. Go. What? Go, leave, take your gap year, or go to Berkeley or UC Davis or wherever. Find out who you are without me. I stepped over the broken glass, moving closer to her. But I have one condition, which is, I get to do the same thing. Mom made a small sound of protest, but I held up my hand. I'm deferring Columbia for a year. Maybe I'll travel too. Maybe I'll get a job. Maybe I'll sit in a cabin somewhere and try to figure out which thoughts in my head are actually mine and which ones are just reactions to 18 years of psychological warfare. Dad stood up abruptly. Now hold on, both of you. You're making rash decisions based on emotions. No, my voice was stronger than I expected. We're making necessary decisions based on reality. The reality is that neither of us knows who we actually are. I looked at Raven, really looked at her, maybe for the first time in years. Under the manipulation and the competition and the anger, I could see something else. Fear. The same fear I felt when I thought about stepping into the world without her as my measuring stick. 1 year, I said. We both take 1 year to figure out our lives separately. No contact, no checking up on each other, no comparing notes. And then what? Then we decide if we want to be sisters or strangers. The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and Mom's quiet crying. Dad looked like he wanted to argue, but seemed to understand this was beyond his control. Raven studied my face, searching for something. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her. 1 year, she agreed. She turned and walked toward the stairs, then paused and looked back. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I think you'll make a great journalist when you're doing it for yourself instead of trying to beat me. I nodded, not trusting my voice to stay steady. And Raven? She turned. I hope you find your dinosaur bones. For the first time in months, she smiled like she meant it. 2 hours later, I watched from my bedroom window as Raven loaded her car. She'd packed light, 2 suitcases, her camera equipment, and a small box I couldn't identify. Mom hovered nearby, crying and trying to convince her to stay for dinner, to think about this more, to at least tell us where she was going. Dad stood with his arms crossed, jaw set in that way that meant he was furious but trying not to show it. Raven hugged them both goodbye. I saw her lips move, probably promising to call, to be safe, to reconsider. But her body language said what her words didn't. This wasn't a temporary tantrum. This was an ending. When she got in the car, she looked up at my window. We stared at each other for a moment. Two people who'd shared everything for 18 years and somehow knew nothing about each other. She raised her hand in a small wave. I waved back. Then she drove away, and I was alone with my reflection for the first time in my life. The next few days were surreal. The house felt impossibly quiet without Raven's presence. I kept turning to make sarcastic comments to her that she wasn't there to hear. I'd start sentences with "we" and realize there was no "we" anymore. Mom and Dad went through their own process of grief and confusion. Dad kept muttering about rash teenage decisions and manipulation tactics. Mom kept asking if I thought she was okay, if I knew where she'd gone, if I thought she'd come back for graduation. I didn't know any of those things. For the first time in 18 years, I had no idea what Raven was thinking or planning. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. On the 4th day, Columbia called. My academic advisor had heard I was considering deferring and wanted to discuss my options. I explained that I needed time to figure out who I was outside of the competitive dynamic with my sister. That's actually quite mature, she said. Many of our most successful students take gap years to gain life experience before diving into their studies. She helped me formalize the deferral and suggested I consider doing something completely unrelated to journalism during my year off. Why? I asked. Because if you're questioning whether your interests are authentically yours, the best way to find out is to try something entirely different. If you miss journalism desperately, you'll know it's real. If you don't, you'll have learned something equally valuable. That afternoon, I found myself Googling random careers. Marine biologist, chef, park ranger, social worker, art therapist. I clicked through job descriptions for professions I'd never considered, reading about people who spent their days doing things that had never crossed my mind. It was like being handed a menu after 18 years of ordering the same meal. One listing caught my attention. Volunteer coordinator for a wildlife rehabilitation center in Montana. 6-month commitment, housing provided, no experience necessary. The job involved caring for injured animals, maintaining habitats, and educating the public about conservation. I'd never shown the slightest interest in animals. I'd never been camping. I'd never lived anywhere but our suburban neighborhood in Ohio, which was exactly why it felt perfect. I applied that same day. The response came faster than I'd expected. Within a week, I had a phone interview with the center director, a woman named Isabel, who spoke with a kind of calm authority that comes from years of handling emergencies. Why do you want to work with wildlife? She asked. Honestly, because I have no idea if I actually want to. I've spent my whole life thinking I knew what I was interested in, only to discover those interests might have been manufactured by competition with my twin sister. I want to try something completely outside my comfort zone to see what happens. There was a long pause. I was sure I'd blown it with my honesty. That's the most honest answer I've gotten in 5 years of interviews, Isabel said finally. When can you start? 2 weeks later, I was on a plane to Billings, Montana, with a single suitcase and no idea what I was doing. The Wildlife Center sat in a valley surrounded by mountains so vast they made me dizzy. I'd lived my entire life in landscapes that had been tamed and mapped and subdivided. This was something else entirely. Wild, indifferent, enormous enough to swallow a person's problems without trace. My cabin was tiny but functional, with a wood-burning stove and windows that looked out onto meadows where deer grazed at dawn. The silence at night was so complete it felt like being inside a held breath. Isabel introduced me to my responsibilities on my first day. Feeding schedules for the animals, cleaning protocols, basic medical care under supervision. The center housed dozens of species. Injured hawks, orphaned bear cubs, deer with broken legs, an elderly wolf who'd been hit by a car and could never return to the wild. The work is physical and emotionally demanding, Isabel warned. Animals die here despite our best efforts. Some of them arrive too late to save. Some get better and leave, and you never see them again. You can't get attached, but you can't stay distant either. They need to trust you to heal properly. It sounded like an impossible balance, but I nodded and tried to look confident. My first week was brutal. I woke up at 5:30 every morning, muscles aching from hauling feed bags and cleaning enclosures. My hands got scratched by frightened animals. I made mistakes, fed the wrong diet to a hawk, left a gate unlatched, mixed up medications. But something strange happened around day 10. I was sitting with an injured fox who'd been brought in with a broken paw. The vet had set and splinted it, but the fox was refusing to eat. Isabel had suggested I try hand feeding him, see if human contact would calm his stress response. I sat outside his enclosure with a bowl of meat, talking quietly about nothing in particular. About Ohio, about college applications, about the sister I was trying not to think about. After an hour, the fox crept forward and took a piece of meat from my fingers. It was such a small thing, such an ordinary part of the job. But as I watched him eat, I felt something I'd never experienced before. A sense of purpose that had nothing to do with competition or achievement or proving anything to anyone. I wasn't healing this fox to beat someone else's record. I wasn't doing it to get into college or impress my parents or add a line to my resume. I was doing it because he was hurt and I could help. That night, I called Columbia and asked about extending my deferral to a full year. The weeks fell into a rhythm. Wake before sunrise, check on the overnight patients, prepare morning feeds, assist with medical procedures, clean enclosures, maintain equipment, educate visitor groups, handle intake calls, document progress, secure the facility for the night. It was the hardest work I'd ever done, and I loved every exhausting minute of it. Isabel became my mentor, and gradually something like a friend. She was 45, had a PhD in wildlife biology, and had been running the center for 8 years. She lived alone by choice, drove a pickup truck older than me, and had a laugh that could be heard across the entire facility. "You're a natural at this," she told me one day as we worked together to examine an owl with a wing injury. "I don't know about that. I still can barely tell the difference between a red-tailed hawk and a Cooper's hawk. That's not what I mean." She gently extended the owl's wing, checking the healing. "You're calm under pressure. The animals trust you. And you're not here for the wrong reasons." What are the wrong reasons? Glory. Instagram photos. The idea that working with wildlife is all baby bears and happy endings. She carefully folded the owl's wing back against its body. Most volunteers quit after a month when they realize how much mucking out cages is involved. I had mucked out a lot of cages. I'd also held dying animals, cleaned infected wounds, and spent sleepless nights monitoring critical cases. None of it was glamorous, but all of it felt important. One evening in late October, I was doing final rounds when I found Isabel in the office, staring at her computer screen with an expression I couldn't read. "Everything okay?" She looked up, startled. "Just reading an email from a colleague in Colorado. They're looking for someone to manage a new wolf reintroduction program." "That sounds amazing." "It is. It's exactly the kind of project I've been waiting for my entire career." She leaned back in her chair. "They want me to apply. So apply. It would mean leaving here. This place has been my life for 8 years." I perched on the edge of her desk. "But it's not your forever life, right? If there's something you want more?" She studied my face. "When did you become so wise about following your dreams?" "About 5 months ago, when I learned the difference between dreams you choose and dreams that choose you." "And what's the difference?" "Dreams you choose feel like work worth doing. Dreams that choose you feel like magic you get to participate in." She was quiet for a moment, then closed her laptop decisively. "I'm going to apply." "Good. But that raises a question about your future here." My stomach dropped. "Are you firing me?" "The opposite. If I get this position, I'd want to recommend you as interim coordinator while they search for my replacement." I stared at her. "Isabel, I've been here 5 months. I don't even have a college degree. You have something better than a degree. You have instincts. And the animals respond to you better than some people with decades of experience. But think about it. You don't have to decide now. I haven't even applied yet." But as she spoke, I felt that same sensation I'd experienced with the fox. A sense of rightness that had nothing to do with logic or qualifications. That night, I called my parents for the first time since arriving in Montana. Mom answered on the first ring. "Oh my God, we've been so worried. How are you? Are you eating enough? Is it safe there? Have you heard from your sister?" The barrage of questions was familiar and comforting. I filled them in on my life at the center, describing my work with the animals and my growing confidence in the role. "It sounds wonderful, honey," Mom said, though I could hear the confusion in her voice. "But what about journalism school? What about your career plans?" "I don't know, Mom. I might have new plans now." Dad got on the line. "Now listen, sweetheart. It's great that you're having this adventure, but you can't throw away your education for some glorified summer camp job. It's not summer camp, Dad. It's real work with real purpose, and I'm good at it. I'm sure you are, but you've worked so hard to get into Columbia. You can't just abandon that." "I'm not abandoning anything. I'm choosing something different." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if we'd been disconnected. "Have you heard from Raven?" Mom asked finally. "No. That was the agreement. No contact for a year. She called 2 weeks ago, Dad said. From California. She wouldn't say where exactly, but she sounded different. Different how? Happy, Mom whispered, like she was confessing a secret.
Alrighty.
She sounded genuinely happy. I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Relief that she was safe, curiosity about what she was doing, and something that might have been pride that she was finding her way.
Ooh, I
That's
can open
good,
this.
I said, and
Let's see
meant
what's
it.
inside.
After I hung up, I sat on my cabin's small porch and looked out at the mountains. Somewhere out there, Raven was building a life I knew nothing about. For the first time in 18 years, we were both
Yep,
writing our
like I
own
said,
stories.
just gives you
2 months
cells
later,
and that's it.
Isabel got the job in Colorado. The center's board of directors interviewed
Okay.
me for the interim coordinator position on a snowy December morning. 5 people sitting around a conference table, asking questions about my experience, my vision for the center,
Prison
my
death.
plans for fundraising
Got
and
it.
community outreach. I answered as honestly as I could. Yes, I was young and inexperienced. No, I
Pick
didn't
them
have a
out.
degree in wildlife biology or
Where's the
nonprofit
prison
management,
at? So
but I
Luke
understood the mission of the
Osprey,
place.
then
The
Blackbridge.
animals trusted me, and I was
Then
willing
from
to learn everything
Blackbridge,
else. What's your
then
long-term
goes to
career plan?
Blackbridge
Asked the board
Shrine.
president, a stern woman with silver hair and calculating eyes. 6 months ago, I would have
And
given you a
Sunday,
detailed
okay.
5-year plan about becoming an investigative journalist.
Do I
But
wanna
that
go
plan
to
was built on
Oxford at this
assumptions about
point?
who I was
Probably
supposed to be
not.
rather than who I
I
actually
kinda wanna
am.
go to
I looked
Ranford.
around the table. So my honest answer is that I don't know my long-term
also the
plan,
ancient
but I know I want to
sewer
spend the
that
next few
can't
years
really
learning how to do this work well. If that's not enough certainty for you, I understand. They offered me the
Yeah, I
job that
can't really go there
afternoon.
anymore
Isabel
'cause I,
spent her final
made
weeks
my
training me
choice
on the administrative
realistically.
side of running the center. Budget management, grant writing,
the prison
volunteer
desk, I'm
coordination,
pretty sure
regulatory
it's just extra
compliance.
cells.
It was overwhelming at first,
It
but
kinda
gradually
is
I
just
began
worth
to
it for
see
me
how
to
all
go
the pieces fit
regardless.
together. You'll make mistakes,
Plus, I have
she
the
warned on
option
her
of
last
going to
day.
the
I made
ossuary,
huge
which
ones
is
my
nice.
first year, but the animals are resilient, the staff is excellent, and the community supports this place. Trust your instincts and ask for help when you need it. She hugged me goodbye and drove off toward her new life, leaving me standing in front of a wildlife center that was now my responsibility. That night, I called Columbia again and formally withdrew my acceptance. The spring brought new challenges. Breeding season meant more territorial animals and complex social dynamics.
shit.
Tourist season meant educational
damage.
programs and fundraising events. A late snowstorm trapped us for 3 days with a power outage and no way to get supplies. But it also brought confirmations that I'd made the right choice. A hawk I'd helped rehabilitate was spotted successfully hunting in the wild. A local school group that had visited
like,
started
what
their
you
own
doing?
conservation club. A family donated money to build a new enclosure after their daughter was inspired by our education program. 1 year to the day after I'd arrived in Montana, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a photograph.
Okay.
Raven sitting on a
Honestly,
beach
this
somewhere,
is-
hair longer
I
than
feel
I'd ever
nice
seen
now.
it, holding a camera with a telephoto lens.
Prisoner,
On the
a
back,
young
in her
woman,
handwriting,
prison
turns out I love
654,
photographing things that are
clutching
beautiful
something in her
instead of
fist.
things that prove a point. 1 year complete. Hope you found
Oh.
what you were looking for. I stared at the photo for a long time. She looked different. Not just the hair or the tan, but something in her expression. She looked like herself in a way she never had
Dude, why
before.
are the
I wrote
effects
back,
so much
found something I
better,
didn't
but,
know I was
like,
looking for.
it's a
The
green
fox you might
scroll,
remember
I
from
don't
my
need
early
that
letters
shit.
is doing well. So am I. I didn't send it. Instead, I walked outside to check on the overnight patients, breathed in the clean mountain air, and got back to work. The second year brought
Does
expansion.
inflammable-
We added
let
a
me
new
just
education
use
center,
real quick.
hired 2 additional staff members, and launched a program pairing at-risk youth with animal rehabilitation work. I learned to
Okay,
write
you know
grants,
what? I
manage
have to, I'm
budgets,
sorry.
and navigate the politics of conservation funding. I also started taking college courses online, not toward a
Very
journalism degree,
vital.
but in wildlife biology, nonprofit management, and environmental science. Learning because I wanted to know more, not because I needed to prove anything. On quiet evenings, I sometimes wondered what Raven
I
was
feel
doing,
like I
if she was
should
still in
split the
California,
difference
if she'd found work as a photographer, if she ever thought about coming home. But mostly, I was too busy to wonder, too engaged with the present to spend much time analyzing the past.
Pro gamer
The
moves
phone
out
call
here.
came on a Tuesday afternoon in
Judging
late
distance
summer,
and that.
almost exactly 2 years after our separation. Is
Love
this
it.
the Wildlife Center? The voice was unfamiliar but with an accent I couldn't place. Yes, this is the Yellowstone Valley Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. How can I help you? I'm calling about a job application. I'm a photographer who specializes in conservation work, and I heard you might be looking for someone to
Sorry, what was
document
that?
your programs. We weren't actively looking for a photographer, but documentation was always a need. Can you tell me about your experience? I've been working with marine wildlife
Oh,
rehabilitation in
no.
California for the past 2
Whatever
years.
you do.
Before that, I did some educational
Goodbye.
photography in
I
Colorado.
love these
I have a
slang
portfolio I can
names.
send if you're interested. That would be great. What's your name? Raven Chen.
Fuck
The
outta
silence
here.
stretched between us while I processed what I'd heard. Chen was our mother's maiden name, a name Raven could have chosen to distance herself from our family. Hello? She said. Are you still there? I'm here. Another pause. Do you want me to call back later? I can send my portfolio and you can review it without.
Why is
No,
the starting
the word
area
came
so
out
much
stronger than I
harder
felt.
than this?
Send me your portfolio. We'll consider it along with any other applications we receive. Okay. I should mention that I'm willing to relocate for the right position. From California? From wherever I am to wherever the work
no
is.
injury there.
I gave her the email address and hung up, my hands shaking slightly.
I
The
could go
portfolio
for a
arrived that
better
evening.
melee weapon,
Raven
but
hadn't lied about her
so far
experience.
this is awesome.
The images were stunning. Sea lions
we
being
can't
released
fight
back into the
those guys in
Pacific.
here.
Before and after shots of oil-covered seabirds being cleaned and recovering. Rehabilitation staff working with injured dolphins. Close-up portraits of animals in recovery that
So far,
somehow
I'm just
captured
kinda
both
like
their
putting my eggs in the
vulnerability
basket
and their
on fire.
wildness. At the
Oh.
bottom of the email was a note. Thank you for your consideration. I should mention that I have personal connections to Montana, so the location would be especially meaningful to me. I stared at that line for 10 minutes before closing my laptop. The next morning, I called an emergency staff meeting. We've received an application from a photographer who wants to document our work, I told the 4 people who made up our core team. Her experience is exactly what we need, and her portfolio is impressive. Sounds great, said Tom, our head veterinarian.
Goodbye.
What's the issue? The photographer is my estranged twin sister.
Bro, that was
The room
3
fell
cells
silent.
from those 2
Everyone knew
dudes.
pieces of my
God
story,
damn.
that I'd come to Montana to figure out my
Were they
life after a
feeding
falling
them?
out with my family, that I'd had a complicated relationship with the twin sister, but I'd never gone into details.
Also,
How
the
estranged?
Malays
Asked
coming
Marina,
from,
our education coordinator. We haven't spoken in 2 years.
Immortals
We agreed to spend time
Immortalis
apart
didn't
so we
make
could
sense
figure
to
out
me.
who we were as individuals instead of as competitors. And now she
Didn't
wants
the
to work here?
like,
Tom looked
did the
confused.
Malays
Maybe.
come
Or maybe she just wants to be near me and this is her
exclusively
excuse.
because Immortals were
Or maybe
made?
she genuinely wants this job
That
and it has
seems
nothing to do
stupid.
with me
Why is that a
personally.
thing?
I rubbed my temples. I have no idea what her motives are.
Also,
What do you want to
people-
do?
that means that
Asked
if
Carla,
anyone's
our
asking
volunteer
for season
coordinator.
2, like,
I want to hire the best person for the
what's
job,
the
but I
point?
also need to
Like-
consider what's best for the center. And having family drama in the workplace
By the
might not be
nature
that.
of,
Can you talk
the
to her?
Malays,
Marina
if
suggested.
it only
Find out
shows
what she's
up
really
because
looking for.
Immortals
We agreed on
exist,
no
then that
contact
means
for
that
2
the
years.
protagonist
It's been
has
exactly
to
2
die
years.
for
So the agreement is
anything
up,
meaningful to
Tom pointed
happen.
out. You're allowed to talk to her now. That evening,
I
I called the
don't
number
really
Raven
want
had
that.
listed on her application. She answered on the second ring.
TBH,
Hello?
bro.
It's me. A long pause. Hi. Another pause, longer this time. How are
what
you?
a
She
rip.
asked finally. Good. Different, but good.
Rip off.
You? Same.
Rip
Different,
off.
but good. Your portfolio is impressive.
Band-Aid.
Thank you. Are you applying for this job because you want to
With
work here,
band?
or because you want to be near me? The directness of the
Band-Aid.
question surprised even me, but it felt
Oh,
necessary.
Amos.
Both, she said after a moment. I want the job because it's exactly the kind of work I've been trying to
Let's
build
keep
my
it
career
going.
around. But I also miss you. You miss competing with me? No. Her voice was firm. I miss having a sister. I closed my eyes. We were never really sisters, though. We were enemies who shared a room. Maybe. But we don't have to be enemies anymore. How do I know that? Because I spent 2 years learning how to be myself without you as my mirror or my target. And because you apparently did the same thing. She paused. The person who runs a wildlife rehabilitation center in Montana isn't the same person who was
Yeah,
so
like that
desperate to
mid-air
beat me
throw?
that she'd sabotage my college applications. I didn't sabotage your
fuck.
college applications. I sabotaged my own. Same difference. The point is, we're not the same people we were 2 years ago.
talking
I walked
about.
out onto my cabin's porch, looking up at the stars that were just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. If you come here to work, it can't be about us, I said. It has to be about the job, the animals, the mission, the work itself. I understand. And if it doesn't work out, if we fall back into old patterns or create drama that affects the center, you'll need to be willing to leave. Agreed. And we need to establish boundaries,
That's what I'm talking
professional boundaries. We're colleagues first, sisters second. Okay, I took a deep breath.
Oh
Send me
my
3
God.
professional references
I'm on fire
and be
right now.
prepared for a formal interview process. I'm not going to give you special treatment, but I'm also not going to discriminate against you. Fair enough. Raven? Yeah? What's your real
We
name
never
now?
even got
Are
to
you
see
actually
the
going by
velocity
Chen?
run
A
effect
soft laugh.
in the
No,
animation
I just
either.
used it for the application because I wasn't sure how you'd react to hearing from me.
that just
I'm
makes
still
you
Raven
say
Morrison.
ossuary?
Same
Come
name,
on, bro.
different person. 3 weeks later,
more
Raven
than
drove
that,
up the
one
gravel
more.
road to the Wildlife Center in a dusty Honda Civic packed with
Give me
camera
prison
equipment and the same 2 suitcases she'd left home with. She looked
this game
exactly
is
like me
great.
and completely different at the same time. Same
is
face,
hard as
same
fuck,
bone
though.
structure, but with an ease of movement and expression that I'd never seen before.
But then again,
This
I
place
am
is
playing on a
incredible,
harder
she
version
said,
of the
getting
game.
out of her car and looking around at the mountains. Your photos didn't do it justice. You've been looking at photos of the center? I researched everything about this place before applying. Your
So there is
rehabilitation
that.
success rates, your education programs,
bro, I was
your funding
1 kill
sources,
away
your
from
press coverage.
that.
She smiled.
Crazy.
Very impressive work. It was strange to hear her praise
yeah,
without the
yeah.
undertone of competition that had colored every interaction for 18 years. I showed her around the facility, introducing her to the staff and explaining our various programs. She asked thoughtful
So there
questions
is
about the
that.
animals' stories, the rehabilitation
bro, I was
process,
1
the
kill
educational
away
goals of our
from
outreach work.
that.
How long do
Crazy.
animals typically stay? She asked as we watched a hawk work through
yeah,
flight
yeah,
exercises
yeah.
in one of our larger enclosures. Depends
my
on the
gold
injury and the
reserves,
species.
obviously.
Some recover quickly and are released within weeks. Others need months of physical therapy.
might as
A
well
few,
jump
like our
right in
elderly wolf,
here.
can never be returned to the wild and become permanent residents. And how do you decide when they're ready for release? It's partly medical. Their injuries have to be fully healed, but it's also behavioral. They need to
No,
demonstrate
like
they can
it.
hunt, can
That's
avoid
pretty
humans, can survive independently. I pointed to the
really care
hawk.
about
She's
that.
physically ready, but she's been in human care since she was very young. We're working on reducing her comfort with people so she'll be appropriately wary when we release her.
That's
Raven
it,
nodded,
okay.
watching the hawk's movements with professional attention. Could I photograph the release process when it happens? That's exactly the kind of
Then-
documentation we need. Her first month at the center was carefully professional. She attended staff meetings,
Each
documented our
consecutive
daily
hit.
work, conducted photo shoots with some of our education animals, and started work on a grant application that required
each
extensive
consecutive
visual
hit that
documentation.
connects-
She lived in a small apartment in town
that
rather than
continues your
on-site staff
combo,
housing,
increasing
maintaining
your
physical and
damage
psychological
dealt.
distance
Combo
from our
expires
shared
after
past.
2.5
When we worked together,
seconds.
our conversation stayed focused on the immediate
if you're
task.
dealing-
When we crossed paths during
or if
off
you are
hours,
dealt
we were
damage.
polite but not intimate.
Your
It should have been
first
exactly what I
melee attack
wanted.
on enemy.
Professional
Okay.
boundaries, no drama, clean separation between work and family history.
Combo
Instead,
might be
I found
nice,
myself missing something I
guess.
couldn't quite name. The breakthrough came during a crisis in early October. A truck carrying racing pigeons had crashed
Every
on the
consecutive
interstate,
hit, yeah,
scattering
might as
dozens of
well.
injured birds across several miles of highway. Local emergency responders
that.
gathered as many as they could
Prison
find and
death
brought them
time.
to our center all at once. It was organized chaos. We had birds and carriers stacked in every available space, some with broken wings, others with head trauma,
Hot as fuck
a few that
today.
needed immediate surgery. All hands on deck, working through the
Maybe I
night to
should fill out
triage
in
and
this form
stabilize.
more.
Raven jumped in without hesitation. She put down her camera and worked alongside the rest of us,
you.
holding birds
Fuck
during
off.
examinations, preparing medications, cleaning wounds, monitoring vitals. Her movements were calm and confident, and the birds seemed to respond well to her touch. Around 3 in the morning, we found ourselves alone in the medical room, working together to stabilize a pigeon with a severely injured wing. Hold her steady while I set this
Hey, bro.
splint, I said. Raven's hands positioned the bird
Why
gently but
not
firmly. Like this?
taking that real
Perfect.
quick?
I worked to align the bones properly. You're good at this. I've been learning from watching you work. I looked up, surprised. You've been watching me work? Not spying,
Yeah, look,
just
this is a bit
observing.
cowardly, but
You have a way
like-
with animals that I admire. She paused.
We're in-
You're
we're in
different
the
here.
endgame.
More
We're in
yourself than I've ever
we're
seen
in
you.
Boss
Different
Zone
how?
too, bro.
Confident but not
I can't even
competitive.
make it there.
Focused but not frantic. Like you found something that fits. I finished securing the splint and gently returned the
finally.
pigeon to its carrier. I have found something that fits. I'm glad.
oh, so
We
it's
worked in
only
comfortable silence for the
melee
next
hits.
hour,
Interesting.
treating bird after
Okay.
bird, falling into a rhythm
as
that felt
good, but
natural
okay.
and easy. As dawn broke, I found Raven on the back porch, finally picking up her camera again to document the dozens of carriers lined up in the recovery area. Thank you for jumping in
Alright, now that
tonight,
he's
I
gone.
said. We couldn't have handled all of them without the extra hands. Thank you for letting me help. She lowered her camera. I know I'm here as a photographer, but working with the animals directly, it felt good. You could do both, you know. Photo documentation and animal care, if you wanted
Come on
to.
now.
She looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Would you
Oh
want me
my
to?
God.
The question hung between
Oh,
us.
bro, get
It was
up.
the first time
Get
either
your
of us
ass
had
out
asked
there.
what the other wanted, rather
let's
than
see.
simply stating our own needs. I think you'd be good at it, I said carefully, but only if it's what
Those
you
guys
actually
aren't
want to
very
do.
tanky, but
I
I
need to
know
think
that
about it.
they do a
3
lot
days
of poison
later,
damage.
she asked if she could shadow Tom during his veterinary rounds. A week after that, she enrolled in an online course in wildlife rehabilitation techniques. By the end of the month, she was splitting her time evenly between photography and hands-on animal care. I think I want to go back to school, she told me one evening
I mean,
as we
look,
were
it's
securing the
lame,
facility
but
for the
I gotta
night.
do
For
it.
what? Veterinary medicine, specialized in wildlife rehabilitation.
No, the only
She paused at the
problem is
gate to the
that-
hawk enclosure. I know it's a long program, and I'd probably have to leave here eventually to complete the clinical requirements. Probably. But I think it's what I want to do
Well,
with my
what am I
life.
supposed
For
to
real
do
this
here?
time. Not because I'm
I-
trying to copy someone or prove
I mean,
something.
look, I
Then
gotta
you should
do
do
what I
it.
gotta do.
She looked at me. Just like that?
I don't
Just
like
like
this.
that. Even if it means losing your photographer and animal care assistant, Raven, I'm not going to hold you back from pursuing what you want just because it's convenient for me to have you here. Something shifted in her expression. When did you become so
Yeah, I really
generous?
don't like this.
When I stopped seeing you as my competition. And when did that happen? I thought about it. Probably the night with the pigeons. When I watched you put the camera down and just help because help was needed.
Oh,
We
it's
were
just
standing close
these
together
two?
in the
Okay.
gathering darkness, our breath visible in the cold air. For the
Oh,
first
and
time in
here's the
2 years,
mastermind.
she felt like my sister instead of my opponent. I have something to tell
knew
you,
he would
she
have
said
this
quietly.
dude on his
What?
side.
I never hated you. All those years of competition, all the copying and one-upping and
Fuck outta
manipulation, I never actually
I'm
hated
so
you.
kidding.
Then why? Because I hated myself. Because I didn't know who I was or what I wanted. And copying you was easier than
Such a-
figuring it out.
it's
She
so
leaned against the
annoying.
fence
Hey,
post.
viewers.
And
What's
because
up,
I was
bros?
jealous. Of what? Of how sure you always seemed. Even when you were reacting to me instead
know
of
what?
following your
Found
own
idea.
path, you still seemed like you knew who you were. I
Hand
never
it
had
up,
that feeling
broski.
until I came here. You seem sure of yourself now. I am, finally. We finished our rounds in companionable silence, then walked toward our respective vehicles. Hey, she called as I reached my truck. Yeah? I'm glad we found each other again. Me too.
Fuck outta
Raven
here.
stayed through the winter, documenting our programs and learning animal care
Oh
while preparing her
my
veterinary school
God.
applications. By spring, she'd been accepted to
That is
3
really not
programs and
good.
had chosen one that specialized in wildlife and exotic animal medicine. When do
Really
you
not
leave?
good.
I asked when she told me the news. Classes start in August, but I could stay through July if you need time to find
That was
replacements.
sick.
I'll miss having you here. I'll miss being here. This place, this work.
I did
It's been
run like
healing
a
for me.
little bitch,
The
though,
work
so
or
that's
being
not
near
great.
me. Both. She left on a sunny morning in late July. Her Honda packed with camera
that's really
equipment,
not good.
veterinary
New
textbooks,
comment?
and a photograph of herself releasing the hawk we'd rehabbed
Uh,
together. The hawk that had learned to be
get
wild
your
again
cred up
despite
when you
being
share
raised in
about-
captivity. I stood in the gravel
it's
driveway
your-
watching her
it's
car
your
disappear over the
Maddie.
hill,
Hey,
feeling a
what's
complicated
up?
mix of sadness and pride.
meet
For the
you.
first time in our lives, we were both chasing dreams that belonged entirely to
Oh my
us.
God.
The center thrived over the next 3 years. We expanded our education programs, built new facilities, and developed partnerships with veterinary schools and research institutions. I completed my degree in wildlife biology through online coursework and was officially hired as permanent director. Raven and I stayed in
Use your
touch,
rune.
not the obsessive monitoring of our teenage years,
Ooh.
but the kind of regular
Oh,
contact
for
that
you.
healthy siblings maintain.
just chilling.
She'd
What
call
about
every
you?
few weeks to update me on her studies, to ask
I'm
advice
doing the
about career
opposite of chilling. I'm
decisions,
sweating.
to share photos of cases she was
But,
working on. She sent me
yeah,
her
I'm doing
first
good.
published research paper on
It's a
raptor
great
rehabilitation
day,
techniques.
Monday.
I sent her photos when we
I used to
successfully
hate
released a
Mondays.
family
Now-
of bears
now I
she'd
like
helped
them.
care for during
I
her
hate
time here.
Tuesdays and
In her final
Wednesdays
year of
now.
veterinary school, she called with news. I got matched for my externship program. That's great. Where? Montana State
Alrighty.
University.
Challenge
Bozeman.
drift.
My heart jumped.
Quiet.
That's only 2 hours from here. I know. I requested it specifically. Why? Because
Let's
I want to
hope
come
I don't die
back.
from
Not
this.
to your center necessarily, but to Montana. To this kind of work. She paused. And because I want to be close to my sister. Your sister who runs a competitive wildlife center? She laughed. My
Yeah.
sister who runs a collaborative
what
wildlife
does this
center.
do?
There's a difference. The following summer, Dr.
Dodging
Raven Morrison joined our staff as our
magic
first
for
full-time
the ground.
veterinarian. She
Dodging
brought new
for
medical
the
expertise, a deeper understanding of rehabilitation
That's better than this,
techniques,
technically.
and a confidence that came from finally knowing who she was meant to be. On her first day back,
Okay.
I found her in the medical room,
now-
examining a young owl with a wing injury. What do you
this one of
think?
your favorite
I
games?
asked.
Yep.
Clean break, Good alignment. She should recover full flight capability with proper rehabilitation. She gently secured the owl in its carrier. She's lucky someone found her quickly. Most of them are, when people care enough to bring them to us. Like we were. I looked at her questioningly. Lucky that people cared enough to let us figure out who we actually were. You mean mom and dad? I mean you. When you told me to go find myself instead of trying to hold on to a relationship that was destroying both of us, you told me the same thing. We told each other. She washed her hands and turned to face me. And it worked. Outside, the mountains stretched toward the horizon, vast and unchanging and indifferent to human drama. But inside our small medical room, two people who had once been locked in a battle for identity had somehow found their way to peace. So what now? I asked. Now we see how good we are at being sisters who happen to work together instead of competitors who happen to share DNA. And if we're terrible at it, then we'll figure out something else. But I don't think we will be. She was right. The sister I'd competed with for 18 years was gone, replaced by a colleague I trusted and a family member I genuinely enjoyed spending time with. We worked together seamlessly, my administrative experience and her medical expertise complementing each other without conflict. 6 months later, we received a call about an injured eagle found near the Canadian border. It was too far for our regular transport network, so Raven and I drove up together to collect the bird. On the way back, Eagle safely secured in a transport carrier, we stopped at a diner in a tiny mountain town. Can I ask you something? She said over coffee and pie. Sure. Do you ever wonder how things would have turned out if we'd never had that fight about Harvard? I considered the question. Sometimes. Do you? Yeah. I think about parallel universe versions of us who stayed locked in that competition forever. She stirred her coffee absently. I don't think those versions would have been very happy. Probably not. I'm glad we're these versions instead. Me too. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Thank you for trusting me enough to let me come back. Thank you for becoming someone worth trusting. We drove the rest of the way home in comfortable silence. Two sisters who had learned the difference between sharing a life and sharing an identity. The eagle recovered beautifully and was released 6 weeks later. Raven photographed the moment when it lifted off from Tom's gloved hands and soared into the Montana sky, a creature that had been broken but was now whole, returning to the wild where it belonged. Later, looking at those photos, I realized they captured something beyond just an animal's return to freedom. They showed what healing looked like when you stopped fighting your own nature and started nurturing it instead. Raven and I had spent 18 years trying to be the same person. It took us 2 more years to learn how to be different people. And now finally we were discovering what it meant to be sisters. The work continued. Animals arrived injured and left healed. Seasons changed. Mountains stood unchanged while everything else transformed around them. And somewhere in that cycle of healing and release, of damage and recovery, 2 women who had once seen each other as enemies learned to see each other as family. It was the best possible ending to a story that had begun with competition and ended with collaboration. But more than that, it was the beginning of a new story entirely. One where we were both the heroes of our own lives instead of the villains in each other's.